The cruelest betrayals do not happen in dark alleys, I told my sister later that night while staring at the diamond-shaped award still sitting untouched on my kitchen counter. They happen under ballroom chandeliers while people applaud. The truth is, I knew something was wrong long before Nathaniel Reed walked onto the stage that evening. It started the moment I arrived at the Imperial Grand Hotel in Midtown Manhattan and realized my name was printed smaller than everyone else's on the event program. 24 years at Whitmore Capital Partners. 24 years helping build one of the most powerful private investment firms on the East Coast. And somehow the gala felt less like a celebration and more like a funeral wrapped in champagne and gold lighting. The ballroom smelled like expensive perfume, polished marble and old money. Nearly 400 investors, executives, and financial media guests filled the enormous circular dining hall, while a jazz quartet played softly beneath crystal chandeliers overhead. Every table glowed beneath candlelight while giant digital screens displayed the words Legacy Leadership Excellence Award beside my corporate headshot smiling down over the room. Legacy. Interesting word. Corporate America only uses words like legacy when leadership wants older executives to disappear gracefully. I should have recognized the warning immediately. Instead, I spent the evening shaking hands with hedge fund managers and institutional investors who had trusted me with billions of dollars in capital movement over the past 2 decades. Men who barely returned phone calls from junior executives stood up when I approached their tables. Private equity attorneys interrupted conversations just to speak with me briefly. That mattered. At the time I thought it was respect. Now I understand it was dependence. Nathaniel Reed arrived nearly 40 minutes late wearing a black tuxedo and his usual expression of effortless confidence. The kind powerful men develop after years of believing they control every room they enter. Cameras followed him instantly across the ballroom while younger executives practically rushed to greet him near the stage. Entrance. He barely looked at me when he passed my table. That mattered too. Beside him stood Vanessa Cole, 33 years old. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Fresh Harvard polish wrapped inside a silver evening gown that probably cost more than my first mortgage payment back in 2001. She was holding a leather presentation folder against her chest, while whispering something into Nathaniel's ear. Too comfortable. Too prepared. And suddenly my instincts started screaming quietly beneath my ribs. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after Whitmore Capital publicly erased me destroyed one of the largest investment firms in New York without me breaking a single law. And tell me where you are watching from, because I spent 24 years believing loyalty protected women like us inside corporate America. I was wrong. Dinner ended shortly after 9:30. The ballroom lights dimmed softly while a giant spotlight illuminated the stage. Applause echoed across the room as the Master of Ceremonies introduced Nathaniel Reed for the evening's leadership recognition presentation. Leadership recognition. Funny phrase. Nathaniel adjusted the microphone calmly, while hundreds of wealthy investors watched from candlelit tables beneath glowing chandeliers. Tonight, he announced smoothly, we celebrate transformation, innovation, and the future of Whitmore Capital Partners. Future. Not legacy. Future. The cold feeling inside my stomach deepened immediately. Because executives only emphasize the future when they are preparing to remove the past publicly. Vanessa stopped smiling beside the stage. Several board members suddenly avoided eye contact with me across the ballroom. One of the compliance attorneys near the back table looked physically uncomfortable. Corporate silence settled quietly through the room. Not confused silence. Anticipatory silence. The kind where powerful people already know someone's life is about to change in front of an audience. Nathaniel folded his hands together beneath the stage lights. After extraordinary years of service, he continued smoothly, Evelyn Carter will be transitioning out of Whitmore Capital as part of our Next Generation Leadership Initiative. No warning. No private conversation beforehand. No dignity. Just elimination wrapped inside applause. For a second nobody moved. I remember hearing the faint clink of champagne glasses somewhere near the investor tables while camera flashes flickered against the ballroom walls. Vanessa kept her eyes fixed carefully on the presentation cards in her hands. Interesting. People avoid eye contact once guilt enters the room. I sat perfectly still. That mattered. Because once women over 50 show emotion inside executive environments, People immediately stop describing them as composed. They start using words like unstable, bitter, difficult. I refused to give Nathaniel Reed that satisfaction. You know what the cruelest part was? I whispered into the champagne glass while the orchestra played softly behind me. They waited until I finished thanking them. The ballroom inside the Palmer House Hotel glowed gold beneath crystal chandeliers, while nearly 400 executives applauded politely around my table. Blackwell Financial Group's annual leadership gala had always been Gregory Mercer's favorite performance stage. Expensive wine, perfect speeches, smiling investors pretending loyalty still existed inside corporate America. And that night, I was supposed to receive the Lifetime Strategic Excellence Award after 22 years managing institutional recovery operations, worth nearly $640 million across the Midwest. 22 years. 22 years of fixing disasters nobody else wanted attached to their names. Bank restructures. Regulatory emergencies. Investor panic. I stayed awake through 70-hour crisis weekends while younger executives built careers repeating ideas I created quietly inside conference rooms nobody remembered later. But standing there inside that ballroom wearing a silver evening gown I bought 3 years earlier because I never had time to shop properly anymore, something felt wrong long before Gregory reached the podium. People stopped making eye contact when I approached tables. Conversations ended too quickly. Even the junior analysts looked uncomfortable holding champagne glasses near the back wall. Corporate discomfort has a smell. Expensive perfume covering fear. Gregory adjusted his cufflinks beneath the stage lights and smiled warmly toward the audience. Calm, confident, dangerous. Before we present tonight's leadership recognition, he announced smoothly, the board has approved several immediate structural transitions designed to modernize Blackwell's operational direction moving forward. Modernize. There it was. Corporate America's favorite word for removing older employees, while pretending innovation requires betrayal. My stomach tightened quietly beneath the tablecloth. Beside me, Allison Pierce from compliance lowered her eyes toward her wine glass immediately. Interesting. People avoid eye contact when they already know humiliation is coming. Gregory continued speaking while giant projector screens displayed Blackwell's logo behind him. Effective immediately, Evelyn Carter's executive authority has been dissolved as part of our long-term restructuring initiative. No warning. No private meeting. No dignity. Just public execution between dessert service and leadership awards. For a second nobody moved. The orchestra stopped playing mid-note. Somewhere near the investor tables, someone coughed awkwardly into the silence. I sat perfectly still. That mattered. Because women over 50 inside executive environments only get one emotional reaction before corporations start describing them as unstable instead of experienced. Gregory folded his hands carefully. Blackwell appreciates Evelyn's years of contribution during this transitional period. Years of contribution. Like I volunteered at a charity bake sale instead of protecting $640 million in operational licensing agreements tied directly to federal banking continuity certifications. My fingers tightened slightly around the champagne glass, but my expression never changed. Around the ballroom, executives shifted nervously beneath soft golden lighting while waiters suddenly forgot how to move naturally. Nobody wanted to witness this directly. Public humiliation makes people deeply uncomfortable once they realize it could happen to them next. Then Gregory smiled again. That part stayed with me later, because he genuinely believed he had already won. Effective tomorrow morning, he continued smoothly, all strategic licensing authority will transition toward our new modernization division under Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa, 34 years old. Perfect posture. Perfect executive smile. The kind of woman corporations promote quickly because she still believed loyalty gets rewarded eventually. But the moment Gregory said licensing authority, something cold settled quietly inside my chest. Not fear. Clarity. Because Gregory Mercer had spent 22 years treating operations like paperwork instead of infrastructure. And judging by the confident expression on his face beneath those ballroom lights, he still had absolutely no idea that federal operating control for $640 million in institutional recovery assets could not legally transfer without the original certification holder personally authorizing continuity release documentation. Me. The applause returned slowly after Gregory finished speaking, But it sounded wrong now. Forced. Thin. The kind of applause people give when they are trying to protect themselves instead of celebrate someone else. I sat quietly at table 12 while servers continued pouring champagne like an entire executive assassination had not just happened beneath crystal chandeliers. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Whitmore smiled carefully beside Gregory, but I noticed something important immediately. She looked nervous. Not excited. Nervous. Because unlike Gregory, Vanessa actually understood operations. And deep down, she already sensed something was missing from whatever transition package leadership handed her before tonight's gala. Gregory lifted his glass toward the investors seated near the front stage. Blackwell's future remains strong under modern leadership initiatives, he announced confidently. Future. Interesting word. Because less than 24 hours from that moment, Blackwell would no longer legally qualify to manage institutional recovery transfers across 5 states unless federal continuity authorization remained active under the original operating license holder. Me. I stood slowly from the table while hundreds of executives pretended not to stare directly at me. My silver heels pressed softly against the ballroom floor as I picked up my evening purse and folded the award speech still sitting untouched beside my dinner plate. Funny. I spent 3 hours writing a speech thanking people who had already decided to erase me publicly before dessert service. Allison reached for my wrist quietly as I turned toward the ballroom exit. Evelyn, she whispered carefully, please tell me Gregory already cleared the continuity transfer with federal compliance. There it was. The first crack. Not sympathy. Concern. Real operational concern. I looked at her calmly beneath the chandelier lights. Did legal sign the release authorization? Her face lost color immediately. Silence answered faster than words ever could. Around us, executives resumed nervous conversations while the orchestra attempted another song near the stage. But suddenly the atmosphere inside the ballroom felt different now. Tighter. Sharper. Because once Allison from compliance realized the problem, others would too. And unlike Gregory Mercer, experienced executives understood exactly what happened if $640 million in active recovery assets temporarily lost federally certified operational authorization. Accounts freeze. Regulators intervene. Investors panic. Vanessa approached carefully near the ballroom entrance holding a tablet against her chest too tightly. Evelyn, she said quietly, Gregory told me the transition paperwork was mostly procedural. Procedural. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. Because Vanessa was not malicious. Just ambitious enough to trust powerful men who never explained the dangerous parts properly. I adjusted my coat slowly while snow drifted outside the hotel windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Federal continuity licenses are attached to individual certification holders, I explained calmly. Not companies. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. Real fear crossed her face now. Behind us, Gregory continued laughing beside investors completely unaware that the company he just used to humiliate me publicly was already standing on the edge of operational collapse. I barely made it halfway through the hotel lobby before my phone started vibrating continuously inside my purse. Compliance. Legal. Investor relations. Even 2 regional banking directors who almost never called after business hours. Snow swirled outside the revolving glass doors while wealthy executives laughed near the valet entrance completely unaware that Blackwell Financial Group was minutes away from triggering one of the largest operational freezes in Midwest recovery banking history. I stepped into the quieter marble hallway beside the ballroom elevators and answered the first call. Daniel Reeves from Federal Oversight sounded out of breath immediately. Evelyn, please tell me Gregory delayed the transition announcement until after continuity authorization filing. Straight to the point. No greeting. That told me everything already. He announced it publicly during the gala, I answered calmly. Silence exploded through the phone line. Not confused silence. Catastrophic silence. The kind professionals fall into when they suddenly realize leadership ignored a mandatory federal process everyone assumed had already been completed privately. Daniel lowered his voice immediately. The emergency continuity certification expires at midnight if active authority transfer is not personally signed by the original license holder. There it was. Midnight. Less than 4 hours away. My eyes drifted toward the ballroom entrance where golden lights spilled softly into the hallway, while Gregory continued entertaining investors beneath crystal chandeliers. Still smiling. Still completely unaware. Who approved the transition schedule? I asked quietly. Daniel exhaled sharply. Gregory pushed legal to accelerate restructuring before year-end investor reporting. Of course he did. Public optics first. Infrastructure second. That was Gregory Mercer's entire leadership philosophy. Another call flashed across my screen before Daniel even finished speaking. Vanessa. I answered immediately. Her voice shook now. Evelyn. Legal cannot locate the secondary authorization matrix. Because there was no secondary matrix. I created the original continuity structure after the 2008 recovery crisis specifically to prevent unqualified executives from transferring federally protected recovery assets without certified oversight review. 22 years earlier, regulators demanded safeguards after several major firms collapsed from reckless executive restructuring. Gregory never bothered understanding those protections because men like him rarely study systems they believe invisible women will quietly manage forever. I leaned against the marble wall while elevator doors opened and closed beside me. How many accounts are currently active under the continuity license? I asked. Vanessa hesitated. Then softly. All of them. Every institutional recovery account. $640 million. Frozen at midnight without my authorization signature. Suddenly I heard shouting faintly inside the ballroom behind the orchestra music. Fast footsteps. Someone from legal rushing toward Gregory near the investor tables. And standing there beneath soft hotel lighting while snow buried downtown Chicago outside. I finally realized something almost poetic. Gregory Mercer humiliated me publicly believing he was removing a replaceable executive. Instead, he accidentally revealed that the entire company had been standing on infrastructure he never once respected enough to understand. By 10:30 that night, the ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like panic disguised as networking. Executives clustered near the bar whispering into phones while legal teams rushed between elevators carrying laptops and compliance binders. Investors who had arrived smiling for photographs now stood near the exits demanding private explanations from board members who suddenly looked 20 years older beneath the chandelier lights. And Gregory Mercer? He stopped smiling entirely. I watched him from across the marble lobby while hotel staff quietly removed untouched dessert trays from the gala tables behind him. His tie hung slightly crooked now. His posture tighter. Amazing how quickly confidence disappears once consequences become real. Vanessa approached me. Again near the elevators holding a stack of emergency authorization documents against her chest. Legal says we can still resolve this before midnight if you sign temporary continuity reinstatement. Temporary reinstatement. Interesting wording. Not reinstatement of my position. Not apology. Just emergency paperwork designed to save the company from collapse after publicly humiliating the person keeping it operational. I looked through the documents calmly while executives pretended not to stare openly from the lobby seating area. The paperwork was rushed. Sloppy. Missing 2 federal disclosures and 1 institutional liability clause, required under post-crisis banking regulations. Gregory reached us moments later surrounded by legal counsel and 2 terrified board members. For the first time in 22 years, he looked directly uncertain around me. Evelyn, he began carefully, this situation escalated further than expected. Further than expected. There it was. The executive mindset that destroys companies. They always believe systems will somehow protect them from the consequences of disrespecting the people quietly holding everything together. I handed the documents back to Vanessa. These filings are incomplete, I said calmly. Gregory stepped closer immediately. Then tell us what needs fixing. Funny. 3 hours earlier I was redundant. Now suddenly I belong to us again because federal regulators were threatening operational suspension, notices if continuity authorization failed by midnight. Snow hammered harder against the hotel windows while nervous executives refreshed emails across the lobby. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, I heard one investor quietly ask whether Blackwell accounts were still legally protected overnight. That question spread fear faster than any public scandal could. Because once wealthy clients suspect instability inside financial operations, trust disappears almost instantly. Gregory lowered his voice. Evelyn, we need your help. Need. Not appreciate. Not value. Need. That difference mattered deeply now. I looked at the frightened executives surrounding him and realized something almost heartbreaking. None of this collapse happened because I fought back. I had not sabotaged systems, had not exposed secrets, had not encouraged panic. Blackwell destabilized itself the moment leadership publicly revealed how little they understood the infrastructure supporting their own company. And standing there beneath gold hotel lighting while snow buried downtown Chicago outside, I finally understood why invisible women inside corporate America become so dangerous once they stop protecting the people who underestimated them. At 11:15, Blackwell's legal team converted an empty executive conference suite on the 32nd floor into a temporary crisis center. Laptops covered the glass tables. Half-drunk coffee cups sat beside federal compliance manuals, while exhausted attorneys whispered into phones with regulators across 3 states. The celebration downstairs had officially ended. Nobody even pretended otherwise anymore. I sat quietly near the windows overlooking snow-covered Chicago, while Vanessa reviewed continuity statutes beside me for the 3rd time in under an hour. Poor woman looked exhausted already. Welcome to executive operations, I thought silently. This is what leadership really looks like when the branding collapses. Gregory paced near the center of the room while board members argued softly about investor exposure. Every few minutes another phone rang. Another account requesting reassurance. Another institutional partner demanding written confirmation that recovery assets would remain protected after midnight. Fear spreads fast in finance. Faster than truth sometimes. One of the senior attorneys approached me carefully holding revised authorization packets. We corrected the federal disclosure sections, he said nervously. Nervously. Attorneys rarely sound nervous unless liability risks become personal. I reviewed the pages slowly while silence settled across the conference room. Everyone watching. Waiting. 22 years inside Blackwell. And suddenly the same executives who ignored my warnings during operational reviews now depended entirely on whether I believed they deserved saving. Gregory stopped pacing long enough to look directly at me. If you sign tonight, the board is prepared to discuss reinstating your executive authority. Reinstating. Interesting word again. Like dignity could be returned through paperwork after public humiliation beneath ballroom chandeliers. I closed the folder carefully. This is not about my title anymore, I answered calmly. And that was true. Somewhere during those past 3 hours the situation stopped being personal. This was bigger now. Bigger than Gregory. Bigger than Blackwell. Because the deeper problem was not one arrogant executive making reckless decisions. The deeper problem was an entire corporate culture built around exploiting invisible labor, while assuming experienced women would continue protecting systems quietly no matter how much disrespect they absorbed publicly. Vanessa looked up from the compliance binders beside me. If continuity authorization fails tonight, how quickly do federal protections freeze? I answered honestly. Immediately after midnight. Silence crushed the room again. Outside the windows, snow drifted across downtown skyscrapers while emergency vehicle lights flashed far below the hotel streets. Inside the conference suite, powerful executives suddenly looked painfully human beneath fluorescent lighting and exhaustion. Tired. Frightened. Unprepared. Gregory rubbed both hands across his face slowly before speaking again. What do you want, Evelyn? Finally. Not commands. Not manipulation. Not corporate language hiding behind restructuring initiatives. Just a broken question from a man realizing too late that leadership without understanding eventually becomes self-destruction. And sitting there above the frozen Chicago skyline while Blackwell Financial Group balanced on the edge of collapse, I realized the answer mattered far more than revenge ever could. The conference suite went completely silent after Gregory asked what I wanted. Not polite silence. Real silence. The kind that settles over rooms once powerful people realize they no longer control the outcome. I looked around slowly at the exhausted executives sitting beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Board members checking collapsing stock alerts. Attorneys rewriting emergency filings. Every 15 minutes. Compliance officers trying desperately to reassure federal regulators that Blackwell still maintained operational stability after publicly removing the one executive legally attached to continuity authorization. 22 years earlier, I walked into Blackwell Financial Group as a junior analyst carrying a second-hand briefcase and student loan debt. I believed hard work created loyalty, respect, security, but sitting there now while snow buried downtown Chicago outside the windows, I finally understood the truth. Corporations do not protect people automatically. People protect corporations. Gregory pulled out a chair across from me and sat down slowly for the first time all night. He suddenly looked older beneath the conference room lights. "Tell us what needs to happen," he said quietly. Not arrogant anymore. Just tired. I folded my hands carefully across the table. First, every emergency continuity filing gets corrected properly before midnight. No shortcuts. The legal team immediately started typing again. Second, federal oversight receives written acknowledgement that operational restructuring was executed without compliance review. One board member objected immediately. That admission could expose leadership liability. I looked directly at him. Leadership liability already exists. Silence again. Because everyone in that room knew I was right. Vanessa watched me carefully from beside the compliance binders. I could see something shifting inside her expression now. Understanding. She finally realized Blackwell's collapse did not begin tonight. Tonight only exposed damaged leadership created years earlier through arrogance and disrespect. Gregory rubbed his forehead slowly. And the third condition? That one mattered most. I stood from the table and walked toward the snow-covered windows overlooking Chicago. The city lights blurred softly through falling snow while emergency emails continued chiming behind me across the conference room. You publicly announced tomorrow morning that Blackwell's operational systems were built by teams leadership failed to value properly, I said calmly. No more pretending companies run because of executives standing on stages collecting applause. Nobody spoke. Because that condition terrified them more than federal penalties. Public accountability. Honest accountability. Not carefully polished corporate language hiding failure behind restructuring initiatives. Gregory stared at the table for several long seconds before finally nodding once. Quietly. Defeated. And in that moment I realized something strange. I no longer wanted revenge against Blackwell. Revenge would have been easier. Smaller. What I wanted was acknowledgement. Truth. Proof that invisible people inside corporations matter long before companies begin collapsing without them. Midnight arrived 23 minutes later. And while attorneys rushed signed filings toward federal regulators across 3 states, I placed my final authorization signature across the continuity release forms calmly beneath fluorescent lights, fully aware that the company humiliating me publicly downstairs only survived the night because the woman they called redundant chose integrity over vengeance. The next morning, Blackwell Financial Group no longer looked untouchable. By 8 o'clock, industry blogs were already reporting unexpected overnight regulatory restructuring activity tied to the company's continuity division. Investors flooded executive inboxes demanding explanations while employees arrived at headquarters, whispering nervously inside elevator banks that suddenly felt too quiet. Fear changes building atmospheres quickly, especially in finance. I sat alone inside my kitchen watching snowfall drift across the backyard, while national business coverage replayed clips from the Gala entrance outside the Palmer House Hotel. Gregory Mercer appeared briefly on screen entering the ballroom hours before the crisis exploded internally. Calm smile. Perfect tuxedo. Completely unaware his company would spend the entire night fighting operational collapse behind closed conference room doors. My phone buzzed continuously beside untouched coffee. Compliance updates. Federal confirmation notices. 3 separate recruiters requesting private meetings, whenever appropriate. Funny how quickly professional value returns. Once corporations publicly reveal how dependent they actually were on the people they dismissed. Then precisely at 9:30, Blackwell released the official statement. I read it twice slowly. Recent restructuring decisions expose critical operational oversight failures within executive leadership practices. Blackwell acknowledges the foundational contributions of long-term operational teams, whose expertise ensured institutional stability during periods of significant growth. Foundational contributions. Not perfect. Still corporate language. But honest enough that everyone inside the industry immediately understood what really happened. Gregory Mercer publicly removed the wrong woman. My television switched toward live financial commentary moments later. One analyst summarized the situation bluntly. This appears less like a technical compliance issue and more like a leadership credibility collapse. Exactly. Because companies rarely destabilize from paperwork alone. They destabilize once people stop trusting the judgment of executives running them. Around noon, Vanessa called quietly from headquarters. Her voice sounded exhausted beyond words. 7 senior managers submitted resignations already. 7. In one morning. Not because of regulation failures. Because employees finally saw what happened to someone who sacrificed 22 years protecting the company. Once workers lose faith that loyalty will be respected, they stop building futures inside organizations immediately. Vanessa hesitated before speaking again. Gregory resigned 30 minutes ago. I closed my eyes briefly while snow continued falling softly outside my kitchen window. Not satisfaction. Just stillness. Because deep down I think Gregory finally understood something too late. Leadership is not standing on stages collecting applause beneath ballroom chandeliers. Leadership is understanding exactly who keeps the structure standing long before everyone else notices. Vanessa lowered her voice carefully. The board wants to know whether you would consider returning as transitional oversight director. There it was. The final irony. Less than 12 hours earlier I was publicly redundant. Now the same company that humiliated me during its leadership gala wanted me to stabilize the collapse caused by underestimating my value. I looked out across the snow-covered neighborhood, while silence filled the kitchen peacefully around me. And for the first time in 22 years, I realized I no longer needed Blackwell Financial Group to define whether my life mattered. 6 months later, I stood once again beneath crystal chandeliers inside the Palmer House Hotel. Same ballroom. Same gold lighting reflecting across polished marble floors. Same skyline glowing beyond the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. But everything else had changed. This time, nobody avoided eye contact when I entered the room. Executives crossed the ballroom to shake my hand before I even reached the registration table. Former competitors smiled carefully. Federal regulators nodded respectfully from across the reception area. Funny how quickly industries rewrite someone's value once the wrong company publicly underestimates them. Blackwell Financial Group still technically existed but barely. The board dissolved 3 major divisions after losing nearly half their institutional recovery partnerships within 4 months. Investors called it restructuring. Employees called it survival mode. The truth was simpler. Companies built on invisible labor eventually collapse once leadership destroys the trust holding everything together. I learned that lesson too late for 22 years of my life, but not too late for the years I still had left. You look happier, Vanessa said softly beside me later that evening. She looked different too. Stronger somehow. Less polished. More real. After Gregory resigned, Vanessa stayed long enough to help stabilize regulatory operations before leaving Blackwell entirely 3 months later. Now she worked beside me. Not beneath me. Beside me. Because one good thing came from that terrible night. We both finally understood that leadership built on fear always destroys itself eventually. I smiled slightly while servers carried sparkling water through the ballroom crowd around us. I sleep now, I answered honestly. That made her laugh. Quietly. But it was true. For 22 years I woke up terrified some invisible operational failure would destroy systems nobody else respected enough to understand. I missed birthdays. Ignored health warnings. Built my entire identity around saving a corporation that would have erased me permanently between dessert service and investor applause if federal compliance laws had not accidentally exposed the truth first. And standing there beneath soft ballroom lighting while snow drifted across Chicago outside almost exactly 6 months after my public humiliation, I realized something that still hurts to admit. The worst betrayal was never Gregory Mercer. It was how easily I abandoned myself trying to earn loyalty from people who only valued usefulness. Across the ballroom, a young financial analyst approached nervously holding a conference notebook against her chest. Maybe 27 years old. Exhausted eyes. Corporate posture. The same expression I used to wear before I understood what endless sacrifice eventually costs women inside executive environments. "Miss Carter," she said carefully, "your recovery firm saved our institution during the Ohio transition freeze last quarter." I thanked her politely, but she kept standing there like she wanted to ask something more important. Finally she whispered, "How did you know when it was time to stop giving everything to one company?" That question stayed inside my chest for several long seconds. Around us, executives laughed beneath chandeliers while waiters refreshed drinks and business deals quietly changed hands across the ballroom floor exactly like they always do. Corporate America never really changes. Only the people inside it do. I looked at the young analyst gently. The moment they made me feel guilty for expecting respect in return for loyalty. Her eyes softened immediately because she understood. Women like us always understand eventually. Sometimes too late. Sometimes just in time. Later that night, after the conference ended and snow covered downtown Chicago in silver light again, I stood alone near the hotel windows holding a warm cup of coffee while reflections from the ballroom shimmered across the glass beside me. 6 months earlier I thought my life ended in this exact building. Instead it began again. Not because Blackwell collapsed. Not because Gregory resigned. Not because industries suddenly respected me after discovering my value publicly. It began because for the first time in decades, I finally understood my worth before a corporation decided whether to validate it. And if there is one thing I hope every exhausted person listening to my story remembers, it is this. Loyalty should never require disappearing yourself completely just to keep other people comfortable. Because the companies demanding your entire identity today will replace your chair tomorrow morning without hesitation if protecting profits becomes easier than protecting people. But your life, your peace, your dignity, those things become impossible to recover once you sacrifice them for applause that was never truly yours to begin with. The snow continued falling softly beyond the hotel windows while the city lights blurred against the night sky, and for the first time in 22 years, I walked away from the ballroom without carrying the weight of someone else's company on my shoulders.